Hi, I'm Sarah Edge. I'm a BACP-accredited counsellor psychotherapist specialising in supporting new mums. I work across the breadth of maternal mental health and wellbeing, but I have a special interest in supporting women during or following difficulties relating to their experience of infant feeding. At the centre of my work is a deep respect for autonomy and choice, acknowledging that sometimes there is no choice when it comes to breastfeeding. I sometimes refer to the psychological distress women and birthing parents experience related to their infant feeding experience as breastfeeding grief, guilt, shame or trauma. And this is most commonly experienced by women and parents that wanted to and set out to breastfeed, but have either been unable to, either at all or in the way they imagined and for any reason. The existing narrative surrounding breastfeeding and infant feeding in general is that it is a choice, but as many as 80% of women and birthing parents plan to breastfeed and are breastfeeding at birth, but this number drops significantly in the days, weeks and months following. Some families who move to either combination feeding or exclusive formula feeding are happy and confident in their feeding choices and do not experience any guilt, shame or grief related to their decision or circumstances, and this is a really positive thing. Families and parents shouldn't and don't need to feel bad about circumstances outside of their control and or about making decisions in the best interests of themselves and their families. However, a number of these mothers are experiencing some level of grief, shame and potentially trauma related to their experience of infant feeding. For some families, continuing either isn't possible or isn't the best decision for their family. Whilst natural, breastfeeding isn't always easy or straightforward, and unfortunately there are things that can go wrong. Babies, especially babies born preterm, may struggle to latch and feed. Sometimes there is an inadequate milk supply, and sometimes no milk at all. Sometimes the mother may need to take medication that is incompatible with breastfeeding, or due to difficult circumstances surrounding the birth, the mother and infant have been separated shortly after birth, and this can make breastfeeding more difficult to establish. Insufficient feeding can contribute to restricted growth and health problems in the infant, which can contribute further to the experiences of distress and trauma related to feeding. Experiences of psychological trauma are more common when there has either been a real or perceived threat to life, which can happen if insufficient feeding or transfer of milk is missed or not recognised, and the baby's health deteriorates, resulting in a medical intervention and potentially a hospital stay. But not all experiences of psychological distress related to breastfeeding are experienced in the immediate period after birth. And for some women and birthing parents, their distress is related to slow weight gain, pain whilst feeding, or even a dislike or aversion to breastfeeding. Breastfeeding for some isn't a wonderful bonding experience with the baby, but is fraught with anxiety and pain. And when the lived experience doesn't meet the expectation of what feeding their baby would be like, this can result in sadness and sometimes anger. Many women describe frustration with a lack of available and hands-on support with breastfeeding, especially support that respects all feeding choices and approaches. Women and parents that are combination feeding, which refers to the combined use of breast milk, either directly from the breast or pumped and using a bottle, as well as some formula feeding, can feel there is no support for them, and it can be difficult to get practical and emotional support when using formula milk. Breastfeeding difficulties is a psychological experience as well as a physiological and practical one. Misunderstanding and a lack of knowledge and experience of this complex issue can mean society and peers don't necessarily understand or support parents through difficulties related to infant feeding. People can feel their grief is dismissed as unnecessary or ungrateful, or feel stigma related to their need or choice to formula feed their infant, with suggestion or inference that somehow they are uneducated or ill-informed to be making such a decision. Parents may formula feed for a myriad of different reasons, including personal choice, and I personally believe this should always be respected. There is often a lot of fear from parents that they have let their child down or failed at the first hurdle, and this can be an especially intense feeling if there have been other prior issues related to physiological processes, perhaps including trying to conceive a baby during their pregnancy and during their birth. Difficulties in these experiences can mean that women feel less than as a woman. Struggling to breastfeed for some parents can have a really detrimental impact on their mood and mental health. Wanting to breastfeed and being unable to in the way that they had initially hoped is a legitimate loss. and to experience grief and sadness related to this experience can be expected. This is likely to be compounded if the experience has been particularly traumatic, painful, and/or involve concerns for the baby's health and weight. It may also form part of a story of a difficult delivery and sometimes a lack of support immediately after birth. The academic literature widely cites breastfeeding difficulties as a key contributing factor to a mother's distress in the postpartum. Women describe that their self-esteem is impacted, their confidence in their own body, fear that they're harming their baby, and guilt and shame related to this. A lack of understanding around the psychological impact of feeding difficulties from professionals also plays a role, and experiencing stigma related to formula feeding. For those experiencing mood-related changes and poor mental health as a result of their feeding experience, it can be helpful to first of all acknowledge there has been a loss and there is grief related to that experience. Grief related to breastfeeding experiences isn't always widely accepted as a form of grief, and therefore there is often little acknowledgement from ourselves and others, let alone flowers. Talking about your experiencing, journaling, or perhaps connecting with others can all help assimilate and accept your experience and make sense of your own story and response to it. To examine your experience through a grief lens can help assimilate and make sense of that experience and your processing of the event. If we understand that the nature of grief and the expectation to move through certain stages and emotions related to experience, we can understand and navigate this time. Moving to a place of acceptance isn't about feeling okay with what happened, but might be about feeling no longer consumed by anger, guilt, or shame, and being able to extend compassion towards yourself. If you haven't been able to breastfeed your child, you're still a good mom. If you have had difficulties related to your feeding experience, you're still a good mom. And over time, and with support and encouragement, you can move on. Hi, I'm Sarah Edge and I'm a BACP-accredited counsellor psychotherapist. I can be found on Instagram at Maternal Mental Health Wellbeing, on the BACP website, Find a Therapist, and by email edgetherapy@outlook.com. I've just spent the day filming with Mindfriend. They are a digital platform that provide reliable and accredited mental health content. Stay tuned for all my upcoming videos.